Oh, and it looks like perfect time for the break to end too. Although it looks like my Elgato broke. That's not good. Zilby did just want food. I took him up. He didn't want to he didn't want to use the litter box. He just wanted food. What's going on with this? Why are you unhappy? Let's try resetting you. Coffee, hello, how are you doing today? There we go. Okay, fixed. Does it feel like the resolution has changed? It might have. Hi. You wanna hang out? Wanna come up here? Maybe? You're doing good? You just got back from work? Nice. Okay, where do you want to go? Oh, coffee. You dream pet the cat. We can pet Zilly while he's up here. Okay. Where you want to go, Zilby? Is not comfortable. Hey. Zilby, this is a good place. Yeah, exactly. Finwo, hello. Sure, sit on the head. Best place in the house. I mean, it is a cat, so I'm sure that's exactly what he feels. You wanna? Yeah. Okay. Oh no. Okay. You don't want to go to your cat place. Where are you going, Zilby? Also, I somehow now have Zilby hair in my mouth, so that's cool. Hi. Are you gonna stay there? No? Maybe? I think he wants me to go upstairs with him and hang out with him not here. But he's not yet to the point where he's gonna be vocal on it about it. He's just gonna stare at me forlornly, begging me with his eyes to go up and hang out with him or play with him or do something. But we're gonna continue with this. All right. Running the container without root. Okay, so I think we can do like create a user. I think that's pretty much what it is. Custom users in Docker. Objectives. By the end of this lesson, you will be able to create a user in a Docker container. Switch to the create a user in the Docker file. Content. So far, we've been setting up our Docker images with the default user, which would be fine in most operating systems. However, in Docker, the default user is root. Obviously, this account has more permissions than we'd normally be willing to allow. So we're going to create a new user in the Docker file and switch to it using the user command, so that when our code runs, it will be running as a user with minimum privileges. Let's add this to the express CRUD Docker file. Run user add -d /code -m code. User code. I put this right under the volume line. Startup Builder, hello. How are you doing today? Am I recording my course? Yes. What I'm doing is we're reading through the lesson articles just to, as a second pass through, make sure that they're what we want them to be. And then I do a recording for it. Although right now what I'm doing is I'm just sort of reading it out, and then I'm going to cut it from the because I'm recording the entire VOD in one go. So I'm going to cut it from that later. I put this right under the volume code line, okay? If you're not familiar with the user add command, this will create a new user on a Linux system. The Node.js image is based upon Debian, as we can see in the tags page, so we can use any Linux commands compatible with Debian. For user add, we're using the -d option to set the home directory to /code instead of the default, which would be /home/code. We're doing this since we are already using that directory for where we're mounting the code from our local system. The -m option tells user add to not create the home directory. This is important since we've already created it. Finally, the code is the name of the user that we're creating. I think we can just remove the... Let's rebuild the Docker image from the Docker file. The previous image that we had won't include this new change. So then I did put a with user in there, so it's a different tag. Notice that I use the same image name, but a different tag, with user, so that we can see both images side by side. We can see both of them with the Docker images command. We can create a new container, add it to the network, and just give it a different name so it can't run at the same time as our previous Express CRUD container. Because we're running both at the same time, I did give it a different port on the host side. We can now connect the container to verify that the application is being run by our new code user. Okay. For further proof, we can check the passwd file to see the user information for code. And this there at the bottom. We can see that the code account on the last line has been given a new group, ID 1001, and its home directory is /code. Here's the full updated Docker file. And that's it. Oh, I forgot the health check in the last one. Shoot. Oh, we need to re-record that, or... I could either re-record the entire thing again, or I could do like a little addendum with a health check. I kind of feel like I want to just do an addendum and like cut that in. I think that would work. So let's Also, I really do feel like the resolution on this monitor has changed. That kind of sucks. I'm gonna reset the Elgato again and see if that makes it any better. Or rather, I'm unplugging it and putting it back in. Brooks from the future here. Yeah, I think I'll do that. Like I might do it like after I said the beginning, or I'll just like cut it. I'll just like cut over to it. That should work. Okay, this feels a little bit better. I like this a little bit more. You're probably frozen. Yeah, because when I move my mouse, you can't see it. So just reactivate there. Much better. All right, so just to remind myself of what we're doing here. With our Docker file, we also have the opportunity to set something called a health check. That is something that's going to help Docker determine if the container is healthy, if it's working as expected. And it could even tell us if it's healthy from the Docker PS command. Let's go ahead and add a health check into this. Now, I like to have the command be the very final thing in the Docker file, just because for me, it makes the most sense to look there. It doesn't really matter the order that I put it though. So I'm going to put the health check right up here. So we're going to do health check, and let's go take a look at the documentation for this, because health check is going to be probably the most complex of the systems we're using here. Let's see, let's find it. Where are you? Health check. So with health check, we're not going to disable with the health check none. We're going to do health check, and then with the command version, because we want it to run a command inside the container to determine if it is itself healthy. The options that can appear before command are, and then we have these intervals. Now, VS Code, because I've installed the Docker extension, automatically gives us what this looks like. So this is perfect. So we have interval. How long? It just gives us the answer right here. So the seconds to wait for the health check to run after the container has started, and then again, the number of seconds to wait before running again after the previous check. So basically just every 30 seconds, start running this. Timeout is how many seconds to wait for the check to complete before considering it to have failed. So we want to basically, if it fails, wait 30 seconds and try again. And then there's, I believe like it needs to retry 3 times. If after 3 times it fails like 4 times in a row, it'll tell Docker this container is unhealthy, because if it recovers after 2 times, we're perfectly fine. I left Zilby came up. I keep on forgetting to take that off when we start the recording. All right. Take two of take 2. It's not really take 3. Okay. Try 2 of health check. We now have our Docker image that we're able to create from this Docker file, but it would be nice for Docker to be aware that it's healthy or not. And there is a system that we can do that. It is called the health check. Now, because we installed the VS Code extension for health check, it's going to help us out a lot. The documentation can be found over here in the Docker file reference, but we're not going to really need this because we get everything we need inside of VS Code. So it just health check, and gives us a good starting place. Now for each of these, like for example, the interval, this is how long it's going to wait to start doing the health checks and then how long between each health check, because this is not just going to be a one and done. This is a recurring thing. So if your health check is going to be expensive, like it takes a lot of CPU or it takes a lot of time to run and then verify, you're going to want to run this less often probably. But if it's maybe something really easy to run, maybe doesn't take many resources up, you can run this more often. I tend to like the default of 30 seconds, but I've seen people go up to like minutes at a time between them. The timeout is used for when the health check fails. So if it does fail, how long to wait before we want to try again? And our start period is how long before we start with the interval. So I basically say, okay, let's wait 5 seconds and then the 30 seconds. So it's going to be 35 seconds before the first health check runs. And then the retries is how many times does this health check need to fail before it marks the container as failed. I think 3 is a pretty good number, but I've also seen some people move this up to 5, some people even down to 2 or even 1 in the case that you're really sure that this command, if it fails, it means things are really bad. And then what's going to happen? Like, what do we do? So in this case, we're going to use the command version of this. So I'm going to get rid of the array and we're going to use sort of like not this style, but we're going to do just a plain old shell command of what we would do to check this out. And that's going to be the curl command. Now, if we want to see what this looks like, let's go ahead and bring up our shell. And I'm going to exec into our currently running Express CRUD app. So we're going to do a docker exec it. We want to go into, what is it called? Express CRUD, I think. And then bin bash. So I want to run curl and just to check that health check app, health check route. So that's going to be HTTP localhost port 3000 because we're inside the container. The outside one where we have 3020 is only on my host system. Inside is 3000. And then health check. And I get this status, I am healthy, but I don't necessarily want all of that back. Plus, like if it fails, I want it to be like really fast. And I think I can do that with the -f command, the -f option for curl, which just should be a little bit better if it fails. So if I try to go like health checks, that gives us that. If I don't have the -f, it gives us this entire mess. Yeah, I don't want that. I want just like a really quick basic output. Either way, I don't think it will matter that much. But let's take that command that we want and we're going to put it into here. So command is going to be curl -f to localhost, no, HTTP, localhost port 3000 because we're in the container, health check. And that's it. This should now, when we run this image into a container, then it should now start running the health check automatically. Let's go ahead, quit out of here. I'm going to build a new image. Now, previously we used the latest tag. I'm going to do another tag for the health check. So let's do a docker build. So we did latest. Let's do a with health check. Build it from dot. The only thing that's different is that health check, which won't take really any extra time for it to run. And we can run this alongside because as long as I bind this to different ports, we can run as many of the Express backends as I want. So I'm going to do a docker run. We have our Express CRUD, our code. Okay, so the only real difference here, first of all, I want the with health check. as our image tag and put it on the same network. And then I want this to be 3021 as a different port. And if I run that, oh, the container name express cred has already been used. I need a new container name. So maybe we'll call this express cred health. That launches that. We can now take a look at Docker PS, which will show this one is health starting. Let me go ahead and bring that up a little bit. Health starting. Now, if we wait long enough, this will transition from health starting to healthy as soon as it runs that. Now, we know it takes 35 seconds for it to begin running the health check. So right now we're sort of like in that, not really there yet. And I can't remember if it has to run all three, not only to determine if it's unhealthy, but also 3 to pass to make sure it is healthy. There it goes. So it has determined that this container is healthy. If for some reason the container crashes or the app crashes and it can't get to that route, it'll mark this as unhealthy. And there are commands you can do with Docker to tell it to relaunch the container in the case that it's unhealthy. But that's out of scope for this course. And so that's it. That's how we can set a health check on our container in the Docker file, so we can later on go and look at it. It's like, yeah, things are working. Things are going good. And I think I'll probably just cut it from there, and then I'll put like the end thing. That'll work. That'll be fine. To remind myself of that, okay, we're done with that. All right, did we just read through this? I think we did. Yes, because it now has the health check and we saw that. So now we're ready to record for you creating the user. So let's go find, I don't think I need to find the man page for this because we could just use user add -h. Okay, let's do that. We'll reset you here. This will be fine. Okay, I think that is good. And the big thing is just the user add. All right. Thank you, Coffee. Hopefully this is good. We should be able to get a single, do this all in one go. We'll find. We'll find out. It is getting to the afternoon. That's usually when my brain starts like having trouble. So we'll see. Looking at our Docker file and looking at our image that we have for the Express CRUD app, everything looks good, right? We do have a concern. It's not really a problem. And that is that we're using the default user inside of our Docker image. And normally in a Linux system, a default user might not be a problem. However, the default user in a Docker container is root. And that means it has access to everything, way too many permissions. So we probably want to switch to a completely different user. However, there's no, like, we have to create that user first. So let's actually dive into our container and like take a look at how that works. So I'm going to do a docker exec. Actually, you know what? Let's just, we know that we're based upon some kind of like Debian or Ubuntu system because we can use like apt or something else inside of Node.js. So I'm just going to docker run it single dash it. I'm going to use this rm command. This rm command means that it's going to remove the container as soon as we're done with it. So we've used the dash dash name to name it. This name is incompatible with dash dash rm because why bother have a name when it's just going to die at the end of it. And then I want to open up, let's just go with node 20 because we're based upon that, and bin bash. So the reason for this is I want to experiment with how to create a user. And oftentimes it's something like user add. So if I would type user A and then did tab a couple times and then user add shows up like this, which is perfect. Now if I do -h, we get the help for it. Looking at it, user add, we have some options, and that's pretty much it. We just get the login ID. I'm thinking about calling it code because that's like, I don't really have a better name for it, and I'm not super creative when it comes to creating users. I'm also like not a really big fan of creating like fun usernames. I want to create them after like what they're doing, and this runs our code essentially. Okay, so what options do we want to have in here? So first of all, a base dir. So base directory from the home directory of the new account. So we can actually set what the base directory is, but also there's this -d, home dir. So home directory of the new account. That's what I want. So I want user add -d. Anything else in here? We have -m to create the home directory, but also -M don't create the home directory. That sounds a lot better for us. All right, so to recreate what's happening here, we're going to make dir /code to create that directory, and then we're going to do user add. I want -d to set the directory to /code. We want to -M to not create the home directory, and then we're going to name the user code. And when we do that, well, the user got created. If I now switch over to that user, so switch su dash to make sure it takes that user's environment and its entire context, and we switch to code, our shell changes. If I do alias.al, we're in, well, we don't see anything in there. We're not in that the express CRUD container, so we shouldn't expect to see our code. If we do a pwd, we are in /code. Perfect. And if we check the password file, so if we cat /etc passwd, we can see that the code user got created here. Its username is 1001, and it also created a group for us with the same name, code, and also just happens to be the same ID too. Also, it's going to be logging in using the sh shell as opposed to like the bash shell, but that's perfectly fine. Okay, so we want to do this exact same thing in our Docker file. Well, what do? We use the user add. So where do we want to run this? We want to do a run command somewhere in here. Well, we know we need it after the code directory is created. So somewhere after volume. Let's go ahead and just, we'll do it here. So we'll do run user add -d for where to put it. So code -M to not create the home directory, and then code. So that's going to create our user. And then we have to switch over to our user too for everything else. Now, is there anything? Pretty much everything is going to be fine. I'm going to go ahead and down here say user code. Anything after this line user code is going to be run as this user. So everything up here is going to be run as the default user, which is root. And that's going to be fine. We're not really running anything anyways. Okay, so this should be okay. Let's go ahead and save you. I'm going to quit out of you. We're going to rebuild this container again. So we're going to do a, what is it called? It's the docker build command, except this time instead of with health check, now we're going to do with user. Now it can create yet another instance of our application. So this is going to be a docker run again. Instead of with health check, we're going to do with user. This is great. Okay. Because express cred with user. Okay, so you should be, oh, and then we have to change the port because we have something else running on port 3021 already. This will be on 3022, and then we have to change the name. So instead of cred health, we would cred user. So if we run this, this launches too. Let's go ahead and docker ps this. Everything should be fine. And just to text this out, let's do a curl http localhost 3022 slash tasks. And everything works as expected. We get all the tasks out of it. So it's now running as that user. If we want to verify that it is, let's exec into that container. We'll do a docker exec. What is this called? This is express cred user. Yeah, express cred user. Bin bash, which I also need to do the -it here. That drops me in, and if we say like, who am I? I am code. So everything is running for this. And that's it. We have now successfully created a user that is not root, and we have set it up in our Docker files so that it will run our code for us. And that way, if it tries to do something that needs extra permissions, it won't be able to. It can only do this one thing for us, which is perfectly fine. And that's it. Hopefully this is helpful. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye. Coffee. Okay, so I saw your question, but I didn't want to answer it in this video. So can you use the environment variable for port in your health check command so that if it's changed, the health check doesn't break? The really cool thing is that it won't change, right? Because, well, I guess there's it, because, well, I guess, that is a good, oh no, because we set the environment here, like the port here, like we know that it's 3000. What I think we were asking is like, can I set an environment variable somewhere in here? And I think that there's a way to do that. I don't remember off the top of my head how to do that, and I think it's out of scope for this course. But like, you can set like a constant or something and then use that. But basically, I hard code the port here inside the same file, and then I just use it here. And then anything I do outside of that, I could like break it, but yeah, we could. I could probably put something like that. Probably would work. Like this would work, but I'm not going to do that. I almost hit return. I almost used a Vim movement. Okay. So let's see. That's done. Automating the setup with Docker Compose. Zilby left, so there's no reason for me to accidentally turn this on again now. Okay, so use Docker Compose to automate the creation of multiple Docker files, containers. That's pretty much it. Docker Compose. Objectives. By the end of this lesson, you will be able to use Docker Compose to automate the creation of multiple Docker containers. Content. We can automate a lot of the commands required for setting up Docker using Docker Compose. This allows us to create a YAML file in the root of our project called compose.yaml. The previous version of Docker Compose required that the file be called docker-compose.yaml. If you see any documentation that requires docker-compose instead of just compose, be aware that I guess it should be docker space compose. Space compose. Be aware that it's for a previous version and your mileage may vary. Mileage, your experience may vary. I think its mileage may vary, right? Will this work? For those of you outside of the United States, does this make sense to you? Or is this like really confusing? And for those of you who don't use miles, do you have a similar thing? Like a kilometerage may vary? Like what's the saying for that? Okay, so it makes sense. Coffee makes sense, rug. Yeah, I feel like this one is pretty well known. It's been around a really long time. But like something I just thought of is like mile is part of it, and mile is like not everybody like most countries don't measure in miles, right? Like most countries measures in kilometers. Is that true? Or is it half and half or so? It is, I think it's imperial system, right? For mile. I'll keep it in right now, but if like people like, what are you talking about? I can obviously change it later. Every time that I write a Docker Compose file, okay, so I feel like this should be part of the video. Let's see. Docker Compose has it can be helpful to keep the reference documentation for Docker Compose up on a second window. It's not worth memorizing every config option, just how it works in general. Let's open up the compose.yaml file that we created. Did we create this? I don't think we created one. Let's create a compose.yaml file and begin adding lines. The full file can be found at the bottom of this lesson. We're going to start with the root level, services object. This will hold the containers that we want to create. In this case, we have our Express app and database. The order of the services doesn't matter. Normally, Docker Compose will attempt to launch them from top to bottom, but won't wait for any of them to finish launching before the next one starts. We'll control that later though, since we don't want the Express app to launch before the database. Since we have our own Docker file, we'll want to use that. We can use the build config and point it where the Docker file exists. If we had multiple Docker files and needed to specify which one we wanted, we can use the alternate forms of build. Our database service is pulling the image directly from Docker Hub. So instead of build, we'll be using the image config. We mentioned before that the two services will launch at almost the same time. However, we need to have the database running before we attempt to launch the Express app. We can do that with the depends on config. And then we have this database condition service healthy. Notice that we are using the long form for the depends on, since that will allow us to have the service not just wait for the database to be launched, but also wait for its health check to pass, which will guarantee that the database is ready for connections. We don't need a depends on for the database, since it is the first service to launch. There isn't anything for it to depend on. Now we're going to set up environment variables for the services. We have two choices. Here we're using the environment config, which requires us to hard code the environment variables into the compose file. If we have secrets in the environment variables, we'll instead want to use the env file config instead, which would allow us to .getignore the .env file or whatever we call it. Okay. Our depends on is requiring that the database service be started and healthy. So we'll need to set up a health check in order for Docker Compose to know that if it is healthy or not. The health check is very similar to what we use in the Docker file, and since we already have one set up for the Express CRUD app, we don't need to add it here. Okay. Since the first time we're launching the database service, the Postgres database exists, but is empty. We're limited on options of how to check that the database is up and running. Here we're running the psql-l-u Postgres command, which will connect to Postgres and list out the databases as the user Postgres. If this fails, the database isn't ready to connect to and will error out. We want to expose a port for the Express app and map it to our host system so that we can connect to and use the app. Here we'll expose port 3000 in the container and map it to port 4002 on the local system. We're using 4002 since nothing else is using that port locally. We don't want to expose the database ports to our host system, so we're leaving this config off the database service. The Express service will still be able to connect to the database using the port exposed in its Docker file, which is 5432. We want to map some values to our containers so we have access to our code, Express CRUD service, and allow data persistence, database service. We'll implement the volumes very similar to what we did when we're creating containers. For the volume we want to create, we'll add a new root level volumes object. This tells Docker Compose to create the new volume and map it to the database container. For the Express app, we can use relative paths. It will figure out where to map things based on where the compose.yaml file is. Here's the full Docker Compose file. And we're done setting up the Docker Compose file. You'll notice that we haven't created a network, and that's because Docker Compose creates a default one scoped to this project. We'll only need to touch the network settings if we want more than one network or if we want to exclude a container from being on the same network as the other containers. In this case, we want everything to be able to communicate with each other. We can launch the project with the command docker compose up -- wait. This will take over a terminal, but will also allow us to see what is happening and in what order. The -- wait will tell the services to wait until they are healthy. Unfortunately, the depends on config that we set up won't work unless we add this option. This will build the Express image from the Docker file and pull the Postgres image from Docker Hub. The health check will take a while, about a minute or two for the database to get set up and verify that it's healthy, but once it is, everything will be marked ready to go. However, we have a problem. When we try to run the app and get the task, the table task doesn't exist yet. We need to make sure that the migrations run before the application starts. We can do this by changing the command that we run in the Express app. We have a custom script in the package.json file called docker dev, which runs the same thing that dev does, but this one has a before script attached to it, so it will run the connects migrate up command before. We could update the Docker file to run this new command. However, we also have the ability to overwrite the default command and run this one in the compose file. Before editing the compose file, let's turn off the services by pressing Ctrl+C and then Docker compose down. Then we can add the command to the Express server in the compose YAML file. Then we can restart the service with the same docker compose up -- wait command. And when we attempt to get all the tasks, we'll successfully get all 0 tasks saved in the database. We now have a much easier way to launch our services and Docker containers on our computer and develop them. We also don't need to teach Docker to our coworkers. We just need to ensure that they have Docker installed and can run the docker compose up -- wait command. This is where like the real magic happens. Like Docker compose makes everything so much better. Okay, so we have that. Let's close you. Let's actually just delete the compose file that we have here, because we'll start over with that. Quit out of view. Well, I just quit out of the terminal, but that's fine. And then I think that's it. So I'll probably be scrolling through and like just sort of following along as I did it in here, but then just sort of like rewrite. Oh, documentation. That up too. Wait, this is legacy. I want reference. Oh yeah, I keep on forgetting the documentation has changed. Now we have like services and then all the service stuff. And then we have like network here. Whereas before the documentation was all in like across. All right. It says ads will start in like 6 minutes or so. I don't know if that's enough time. You know what? Let's I'm gonna run the ads early. I'm gonna go use the restroom really quickly. Zilby's not here, so I don't have the camera on, and then we'll start the recording right afterwards. That way, it'll be available to all of you. So, quick 3-minute break, starting right now.